This final preview of Stave 5 of A Christmas Carol, which I entitled The Importance of Everyone. I think the cliche sort of tag of A Christmas Carol is God bless us, everyone. And I think it's important to be mindful that when you're reading a great Dickens novel, everyone is in it. There isn't a corner of reality that he's not acknowledging. And I think that's really, really important so that the spirit of the sort of moral of the story is imbued by how the novel is written itself. Okay, summary of Stave 5. Again, probably the summary is not super surprising since you probably know the arc of the story. But anyway, first couple of pages, Scrooge wakes up utterly different. The very iconic scene of Scrooge going to the window, a boy's passing, and he asks the boy to buy a turkey. And there's some ink spilled about why it's a turkey and not a goose. And I think turkey is seen as a more American thing, and maybe it's more of a luxurious perk. So that's interesting if you're curious about culinary history. But interesting interchange there. Sidebar: if you have a dark sense of humor, you want to YouTube Steve Martin and Martin Short's Saturday Night Live sketch, A Christmas Carol sketch. It's a parody of this scene. It's a little violent, but it's hysterical. Third, Scrooge meets the two men from Stave 1, the guys collecting money from the poor. Scrooge goes to church briefly. Scrooge walks the streets. Scrooge visits Fred for Christmas dinner, finally, after all these years of ignoring his invitations. And then there's a kind of a little playful version of Scrooge where he tricks Bob Cratchit the next morning, which is great, and then proceeds to change his life forever. And we're going to talk more deeply about the concluding paragraphs. But we get a window into the future, and then the novel sort of reaches out to us, the reader, to remind us of how to live our life. Okay, something I've been thinking about. How does the reformed Scrooge, and I had to acknowledge the Muppets, by the way, because if you haven't seen the Muppet Christmas Carol, you really haven't lived yet. How does the reformed Scrooge become like the moments of joy and celebration from Staves 2 to 3? I think of the scene when the ghost of Christmas presents described and all the food surrounds him. I think of the food descriptions on the streets of London. I think of the joy of Scrooge's former fiancee Belle's house with all the kids. Um, there's several moments of like joy and almost excess, right? So I'm wondering, how does the reformed Scrooge change? It's more than he's now nice. Like Dickens doesn't traffic in nice. I don't think he has much interest in that. It's more substantive. So how is he like the moments of excess and joy that we saw earlier on? So here are some examples, I think. Um, Scrooge tells the boy passing, no, don't get the little turkey for Bob Cratchit. Get the prize turkey. And it's the one as big as the boy. So God only knows, 20, 30 pounds, whatever, even bigger. Excess, right? And then he says, if you come back quickly, I'll give you half a crown, which would have been an unreasonable amount of money. When he whispers a sum of money to the two men raising money for the poor. One says, I don't know what to say to such in its munificence, generosity. So he offered a titanic amount of money to him. When he accepted Fred's invitation for Christmas, it said it's a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. So it's not a simple, polite greeting. Scrooge is over the top. Um, at the end, and I'm going to talk about this vocabulary word because it's just quirky and fun. We'll discuss your affairs this very afternoon, he tells Bob Cratchit, over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop. And we're going to go over what that means. And then at the very end, Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. For Tim to not die, he would have had to gone from the malnourished kid with what we think is like rickets to having plenty of nourishment. So it wasn't just random sporadic acts of generosity and kindness. It would have to have been a complete reinvention of his support of these people. So I just would like to point out that it seems that Scrooge has become like the descriptions of excessive joy that existed beforehand. So it isn't just nice. An essential passage is another one that's not obvious. And It's from Stave 5, and this isn't so much in the film versions. Um, he went to church and walked about the streets and watched the people hurrying to and fro and patted children on the head and questioned beggars and looked down into the kitchens of houses and up the windows, and he found everything could yield him pleasure. He had never dreamed that any walk, that anything could give him so much happiness. In the afternoon, he turned his steps toward his nephew's house. One of the most brilliant moments in all of Shakespeare is the scene between Hamlet and his buddies Rosencrantz and Guildenstern in Act 3 of Hamlet. And without getting into the weeds of another book, Hamlet says he basically feels like he's in prison, and his buddies say, well, you're the prince. It's not really like you're in prison. And Hamlet said, well, there's nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so. To me, it is a prison. So my question is, borrowing from that idea that you can think your way into a new mentality, is Dickens or is this novel saying that happiness is a choice? So that's a conversation we could have. It seems that Scrooge has been scared into seeing the world completely differently, but he's choosing to do it. And I don't know, I think it's an interesting question. Smoking Bishop. I'm going to try making this over Christmas. I never bothered looking up what this is. I just presumed it was like, I don't know, a dessert of some kind. I never looked it up. But it's a type of wine, mulled wine, popular in 18th, 19th century England at Christmas time, made from port, which is like a fortified wine, dessert wine, red wine, lemons, or a particular kind of orange, sugar, and spices like cinnamon and cloves. And it's called Smoking Bishop. It's called Bishop because of the red colors, and bishops would wear red vestments. But I want to mention this because it's not simply that Scrooge is raising Cratchit's salary, and we know later he's going to basically save the life of Cratchit's child by probably, letting him be fed enough. Even taking Cratchit out for this luxury, I mean, he wouldn't let Cratchit use an extra piece of coal 4 staves ago. And now he's taking him out for a drink that, I don't know, I'm guessing Cratchit with 6 kids and a working class salary has no money to have stuff like this. So it's a sign, it's another sign of Scrooge's conversion, actually, this very choice here. Okay. Very famous conclusion to this novel, and I'd like to steal from it. So we have to conclude our narrative. And I just want to say with my students, they'll do 5 different exercises based on each stave, right? 1 per stave. You don't have a complete story at the end. You just have a lot of raw material that you can use, right? And that's kind of the point. Okay. First, write 1 or 2 sentences about the protagonist of your memory and describe him or her after the memory ends. In other words, what sort of person did he or she become? And that could be a month later, that could be decades later. So pause and write those sentences. I wrote, my little brother is now the 44-year-old version of that little chubby kid back in 1983, still brimming with excitement over every holiday, still wishing he could speed up time to arrive sooner at the moments of greatest joy. I wouldn't be surprised if he woke up his little son to start Christmas before the sun came up. That's true. Next, write 1 or 2 sentences about what other people think of this person and what this person thinks of how other people perceive him or her. So pause and write that out. Chris has become the man in the kitchen, the man with the gifts, the man making the homemade meatballs, the amazing pizza, the loudest man at the party, the man most excited to get it started. I don't think other people's opinions of him ever cross his mind. If they do, he gives no indication that they affect him in any way. 1 or 2 sentences describing, connecting the memory you have to who this person is now. This is the record, Who Are You by The Who. Please get it. 1 or 2 sentences connecting the memory to who this person is now. So pause if you need to. Chris never tried tricks like the clock turning again. I don't think he had to. Maybe knowing he could pull it off was enough for him. He still remains unpredictable even as an adult. Any phone call from him is like teleroulette. He could be home watching TV, playing a gig in Boston, scouring the grocery store for the perfect San Marzano tomatoes, or flying halfway across the country to see a band he loves. And then end your paragraph with a sentence that the character says in the story itself. One thing remains constant throughout the decades. We can still see Chris's jovial face over a holiday table, Chris joyfully washing a mountain of post-dinner dishes, and maybe, just maybe, Chris asking in a voice much deeper than it was in 1983, "Is there more bacon?" So here's the model paragraph. This is this is everything I just wrote. I don't think I have to read it, but there it is. Here's the model passage. It's the end of the book. Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh, and little heeded them. For he was wise enough to know that nothing ever happened on this globe for good, at which some people did not have their fill of laughter in the outset. And knowing that such as these would be blind anyway, he thought it quite as well that they should wrinkle up their eyes in grins as have the malady in less attractive forms. His own heart laughed, and that was quite enough for him. He had no further intercourse with spirits, but lived upon the total abstinence principle ever afterwards, and it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that be truly said of us, and all of us, and so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, every one. Happy reading, everybody, and I hope these videos have helped you. I hope you produce some interesting writing. And I hope Dickens expanded what you thought writing could be, because he tends to notice and see everything. Good luck and Merry Christmas.